What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, April 8th, 2019, start of a brand new week here. We have got lots and lots of stuff to talk about. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone and put you on the air with your comments, questions, and observations. And regarding my little sort of moment of self-pity end of last week, it turned out I was coming down with a bug. And so I'm a little under the weather right now, but when I'm coming down with a bug, before I reach the point where I say, hey, I've got a bug, I tend to have these bad moods. And so that was kind of what was happening. So my mood is better, still not feeling well. I'm hoping to shake this in a few days. Boy, everybody over at Claire's church, they were all sick, even the pastor, this last Sunday. And so I don't know what's going on here. Anyway, let's get on into it. There's a lot of stuff going on, and I would say probably Libya once again in the headlines. And there is a huge fight going on between the Libyan National Army, led by Haftar, and the UN recognized government that, they're basically fighting for control here. Now, remember, that UN-backed government was the one that was installed 8 years ago after NATO and the United States killed Muammar Gaddafi, put Libya back on private central banking, locked Libya's oil back to the US dollar, and basically plunged Libya into chaos that has continued to this very day with various warring factions trying to seize control. And this General Khalifa Haftar apparently has managed to pull together quite a sizable coalition from among these various groups, and they're marching on Tripoli right now. So and this is for real. This isn't just we've got flags and we're talking tank battles, we're talking airstrikes, and of course, the U.S. is out there urging the Libyan National Army's leader, Haftar, to please stop the offensive on Tripoli. Mike Pompeo came on out and said, there's no military solution to the Libya conflict. Well, that certainly isn't what the U.S. was saying 8 years ago when Hillary Clinton sat there in that interview and said, we came, we saw, he died, and then cackled her little witch's cackle. This mess in Libya is the outcome of that ill-advised NATO toppling of Gaddafi. If Gaddafi had been left alone, things in Libya would be calm. Of course, Libya's oil would still be going out for the golden hour. The golden hour would still be a threat to the dollar. So who cares if we wreck another country here as long as the dollar reigns supreme and the oil flows. The oil must flow, but only for the U.S. dollar. So this is another foreign policy disaster created by the United States of America. And Libya has basically been in this constant state of chaos since the intervention back in 2011. And after Muammar Gaddafi was killed, the country fell into the hands of these warring armed factions, many of which were linked to radical Islamist groups. Al-Qaeda and then ISIS strengthened and expanded their presence in the countries and led to, of course, a humanitarian crisis and a high level of violence. Now, NATO did very little to change the situation, probably because the Western-backed Government of National Accord, the GNA, based in Tripoli, is itself largely linked to radicals. So groups that declared their support to the GNA control a part of northwestern Libya. The only real anti-terror effort undertaken by pro-GNA forces and their foreign backers took place in 2016 when they moved to basically chuck ISIS out of the coastal city of Sirte. Despite this, ISIS is still there, many of them having been imported from over in Syria. So earlier, the forces loyal to General Khalifa Hifter, said they seized control of the main airport in Libya's capital of Tripoli. And they released a video showing their troops in the concourse, showing they were in control of the facility. This, of course, prompted the other government, the U.S.-backed government, to launch a major airstrike against the Mitiga airport and basically just flatten the place. Now, Mitiga has been the only airport used for international flights since the capital's international airport was destroyed back in 2014. So things are escalating very, very quickly. Article out of Veterans Today. Is this the final showdown for control of Libyan oil? Yes, it may well be. Because if General Haftar gets his way, Libya will be back under the control of a Libyan government, and they'll be making decisions that are what's best for Libya, not what's best for American corporations. Okay, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. We're talking about this war that just cranked up in Libya, a direct result of the U.S. Intervention, NATO intervention, Hillary's intervention 8 years ago. And apparently when the fighting started, the U.S. forces stationed in Tripoli were evacuated. In fact, they were evac'd out. It's almost like Saigon at the end of Vietnam. They just threw them on the helicopters and got them out. From which I would say that probably the U.S. strategy right now is to just let the Libyans kill each other off, turn it into a bloodbath, and then after everybody's lying on the ground, the U.S. will send in humanitarian aid to retake control of the oil wells and the banks. It's a mess over there. Over in Yemen, there's been a Saudi coalition airstrike. It bombed an area next to a girls' school in Sana'a, and it killed at least 11 Yemeni girls and a total of 54 people wounded. And apparently this bombing of this area next to the school triggered an explosion at a warehouse and just killed all those people. Now, here's what's really interesting. There's a new development regarding Saudi Arabia. And over in Saudi Arabia, satellite photos are showing that they're nearing completion on their first nuclear reactor. Well, Saudi Arabia, probably like Iran, understands the oil is not going to last forever, and the oil is worth more to us selling it to other countries than burning it up ourselves. So they're building a power plant. The problem is, can that power plant be used to make bomb stuff? And the answer so far appears to be yes. Now, here's where it gets a little bit interesting, because an article coming out of Al Jazeera says that President Trump is rushing to see Saudi Arabia get nuclear technology. And does that include nuclear weapons? Maybe. We know that Saudi Arabia has been talking to Israel for some years now about nuclear weapons. But apparently over in the Congress, they're a little upset because apparently they were not read in on these talks. And they view them as basically a U.S. green light for Saudi Arabia to have nuclear weapons. And congressmen want to know whether or not this approval was issued after dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi was murdered at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Now, Mike Pompeo is taking a different position, saying that the United States will never allow Saudi Arabia to become a nuclear power. So you've got Trump saying and doing one thing, you've got Congress doing another, you've got Pompeo doing another. We're starting to get an image here of a almost dysfunctionally factionalized government where everybody's pursuing their own agenda. And it's another reminder, Trump, unfortunately, is proving himself to be a weak leader. He can't get his house in order. That strong manager we saw on the reality show just doesn't really exist. Down in Syria, Russia is now demanding that the United States leave the Syria-Jordan occupation zone. This is the area of the Rukban refugee camp in Syria, which the U.S. is not allowing any of those refugees to leave and go home. And Russia has come on out and said, well, as long as the United States maintains that refugee camp and keeps everybody in it, that's their justification for staying. But we see through that. And the occupation of this territory by the United States is illegal. And they're accusing the U.S. military of collaborating with illegal armed groups in the Al-Tanf area. So things are just building up and building up over there in the Middle East. Syria's Deputy Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim stated during a press conference with his Venezuelan counterpart Jorge Ariaza that the occupied Golan Heights is Syrian, and saying that Syria will retake it by any means necessary. Well, it's a little bit of tough talk when you're going up against a nuclear power, but maybe Walid has an ace up his sleeve. Maybe Russia's already committed to helping them. Maybe China has. But Muallim said Donald Trump's decision to recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights has only isolated them in the region, adding that our right in the occupied Syrian Golan is firm and can't be disclaimed by time lapse, and every inch of the occupied Syrian territories will be liberated. So Trump has really managed to just annoy almost everybody in the Middle East, except, of course, for Israel. All right, getting on back here. Apparently, over in Al-Anbar, Iraq, the Arabic language Al-Ma'alo News website is quoting the head of the Beta Organization's office in Al-Anbar as saying that the number of U.S. forces deployed in Ain al-Assad and Al-Habanaya bases has increased to 10,000, adding that they are being supplied with state-of-the-art weapons and military equipment. These are clearly combat forces and are not considered as military advisors. So that's 10,000 combat forces sitting in Iraq. And I imagine that's got to be making Bashar al-Assad a little bit nervous. But reports said last month the American forces had established these two military bases in Al-Anbar province on Iraq's international road close to the borders with Syria and Jordan, even as political groups and politicians are trying to expel the U.S. military troops from their country. So it looks like Syria's back in the crosshairs. Amazing. All right, well, apparently that brouhaha in Turkey over the S-400 is continuing. And there was an interesting little article over an Investment Watch block on how Rising Power Turkey bought the S-400 to increase autonomy on the world stage. Now, I had a thought over the weekend. I was looking at the way that the U.S. was just arm-twisting Turkey to buy the Patriot or the American systems. And obviously there's an economic motive. There's a lot of money involved in these weapons sales here. But every time you sell a weapon to a country, especially one that's sort of lukewarm in its relations, you have to deal with the possibility that that country could become an enemy, and those weapons that you sold it could be turned against you. So, hypothetical. What if the latest generation of American air defense systems have malware in them where they can be disabled remotely, so that if Turkey turns on the United States and they're using the U.S. missile systems, the U.S. flies into attack, or Israel flies into attack, and they launch the air defense system, whether it's Patriot or THAAD, and it just falls out of the air. In this age, excuse me, I had a sneeze. In this age of massive cyber warfare, I would be very cautious about buying weapons from the United States right now. Of course, Russia could be doing the same thing as well. You don't really find out until the war is joined. Meanwhile, over at the UN's review, apparently Trump's neocons are seeing Turkey and Erdogan as their ticket to a region-wide Mideast war. They're actually talking about it. They want to start a war that is reaching all the way across the Mideast, including, obviously, they want to get into Iran. So that's another reason to suspect that these 10,000 combat troops sitting near the Syrian border in Iraq are getting ready to march into Syria. It's insane. It's insane. The United States is bankrupting this nation to make war on countries who have not done anything wrong to the United States other than to sit over natural resources coveted by American corporations. And obviously refusing to run their economy for the benefit of American banks. But I guess that's a good enough reason for war in the fourth generation of war era, as it were. Meanwhile, and this is going to annoy Israel somewhat, France is going to give Lebanon defense equipment to secure maritime and land defense. Of course, they're not actually giving it. They've opened a financing account of 400 million euros. That's about 450 million US dollars. And so Lebanon is now going to borrow money from France to buy weapons from France. And once again, the U.S. loses out on that lucrative weapons trade. And I'm sure they're going to stamp their feet and accuse France of being cheese-eating surrender monkeys again. Remember that whole thing when France was building those warships for Russia? And the United States literally just said, no, you can't do that. Big stink. Okay, down in the Sudan, things are getting ugly there. As you know, there have been massive protests for a long time, but apparently protesters are now attacking the Sudanese security forces. They're capturing their weapons and opening fire. So it's looking like this could be the beginning of an all-out civil war. Up in Ukraine, Pyotr Poroshenko is out there campaigning. They've had their first round of elections, and he's now out there campaigning, saying that he's pledging to bring many young people into his team if he wins election for a second term. And this was in an interview with the Ukraine TV channel on Sunday. Now, Poroshenko is actually desperate. He got clobbered in the first round of elections, nearly 2-1. So now he's out there just saying whatever he thinks is going to get people to vote for him. Maybe he could hand out free chocolates or something like that. Meanwhile, the U.S. ambassador is out there assuring NATO that we, meaning your kids, will guarantee passage of Ukrainian warships through Crimea waters. Now, here's where it gets a little bit sticky, because that Kerch Strait, even though Crimea does border the Azov Sea, the Kerch Strait itself is considered Russian territory. And again, it's another provocation. And basically what they're saying is that the U.S. is going to guarantee that NATO, or rather NATO will guarantee Ukrainian army can return to Crimea. So are they going to try and take that back? It is going to be a world war. I don't see this thing holding out till the end of the year. I think we're going to be full on in it by the end of the year. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And once again, a very heartfelt thank you to everybody who has been donating. And I know we keep asking, but it has been a struggle. And I know that many of us are struggling just to get by, which is exactly the way the government wants it. because the more we're having to struggle just to survive, the less able we are to stand up and say, stop these stupid wars. Stop lying to us. Stop, plundering the American people to prop up the banks, not to mention Israel. So we're in a wartime economy, and the struggle is real. And, the things I was saying last Thursday, they're not diminished by the fact that I was coming down with a bug. It is very frustrating to always be on the edge like this. So if you can help, please do. And the postal address to send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can make a credit or debit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. Okay, now, just to show you how crazy it is getting over there, one of Poland's top former military commanders who led Poland's land forces until 2009, General Waldemar Skrzypczak, I think, came on out saying that there is a Russian threat to Europe and that the United States ought to consider a preemptive nuclear strike on Russia. And a lot of people are understandably alarmed by this. And I'm alarmed by it because Paul Craig Roberts was saying some of his people in Washington, D.C. were saying exactly the same thing. And maybe this is a trial balloon to see how the public would respond to a nuclear attack, because there's a couple of other things that happen. Russia Today is reporting that over in Germany, a respected German analytical TV program opened its latest edition with a story that Russian forces had invaded Estonia and NATO is on its way. And they just went into this fake war broadcast saying about how Russia has invaded Estonia the way they did Crimea, which they didn't. And, of course, the viewers were just panicking. They were completely freaking out. But then the host said, don't worry, this is not true. It's just a fantasy scenario, but a realistic one. It could be true. Why would you do that to your audience? Unless to just get them used to the idea that war is coming. Now, speaking of Germany, Der Spiegel, which is one of Germany's top news outlet, just had to let go one of their top reporters and suspended 2 editors after it was found out that Klaus Relotius, a top reporter who's won multiple awards, those gold things up on the wall I warned you about, he's a fraud. He invented stories in at least 14 of his 60 published Der Spiegel articles. So there's the corporate media for you. Okay. All right. Let's take a phone call. Tony in Puerto Rico. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I was listening to your program on Friday. I didn't want to see you personally, see your face, because I know you were sick and I was like brokenhearted. So I heard you. I didn't want to see you. But anyway, you mentioned something about Adolf Hitler was forced to war by the bankers. Can you amplify on that? I really didn't understand what you're trying to mean, what you meant by that.
Okay, well, you might want to go down the main page of whatreallyhappened.com today, because there's actually an article that shows that, in fact, it's probably scrolled over to page number 2. But apparently documents have surfaced showing that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was very much involved in getting Europe to make war on Germany. And so FDR's role in World War II started much, much earlier than his plot to get Japan to bomb Pearl Harbor. But the reason all had to do with private central banking and manufacturing and markets. And when the Nazis came to power and the Weimar Republic collapsed, they threw out the private central bank imposed on them by the Treaty of Versailles. They issued a value-based currency. Germany's economy took off. They became a manufacturing power with which countries still enslaved to private central banks could not compete. So all those countries were being pressured by their bankers. You have got to take this down before it gets out of control. Anyway, Tony, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go to the phones again. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
It looks like you're a lot better, Mike.
Yeah.
Still got to have that chicken soup, though.
Yeah, that actually sounds pretty good right now.
And Mike, on Libya, that General Haftar, he's like they call him a field marshal. Now, troops. I know they just seized an oil fields. I don't know which one, but you know he was one of the ones that overthrew Gaddafi, like forces.
Yes.
Like he was backed by the CIA. He lived in Virginia. He was a U.S. citizen or something. So something's flipped. Like he flipped sides maybe, and I'm hearing something else where the French are protecting his supply lines. So there's like a lot of like double dealing going on here. You know, I mean,
yeah.
You know, it's like a cash grab. Everybody's running into Libya now to grab what they can. You know, like they did in Iraq and Syria too. You know, like with the jihadists grabbing gold and getting out and giving it to the Americans. I mean, there's a lot of nasty stuff going on in terms of like just ruining the world. Like it's like, I mean,
well, that's
everywhere.
That's exactly what it is. The U.S. literally wants to capture the world to be able to plunder it before things fall apart inside this country. It literally is a race. We know our economy is very fragile. And you can just almost see day after day this whole process of hegemonic domination. It's accelerating. Now they're talking region-wide wars in the Middle East. They're talking about going into Venezuela, and it really is out of control.
Now, Mike, I'm going to jump to Poland, that former general, and the mindset of the elite in Poland and Lithuania and Estonia, that we said it before. There's nothing in the West that Russia wants. Okay, people, you don't make anything that Russia wants. They have moved east. The Belt and the Road with infrastructure projects.
Yes.
Anybody can go on YouTube, look at the infrastructure projects Russia is doing with China. A new bridge is going up over between the link to two for the Belt and the Road. China's building a underground railroad for Russia outside Moscow. So there's nothing in the West. So this is all bunk.
Well, see, the United States for decades has kept itself going by making sure that all the world's commerce passes through the United States for a small fee, using U.S. currencies on which interest is charged. And that's all coming apart now. And so in order to reassert the equivalent of Bretton Woods, to basically reassert, commerce comes through our ports, they use our cargo ships, that's what all these wars are really all about. We can't compete with the rest of the world, so we're going to smash up the rest of the world until they can't compete with us.
And Mike, Estonia, this was a couple of years ago. They had this movie they made about a Russian invasion in Estonia. I mean, there's nothing there. They buy their stuff from China, too.
Yes.
China's the manufacturer. And then, Mike, there was also a thing, this was on the BBC, this was years ago, where it was like a what-if scenario where Russia and NATO went at it, and it had a bad ending, like at the end of the movie, like the day after kind of ending.
Yes.
Well, beginning of the day, but it's just this constant propaganda being pushed.
Yes.
You know, by, like you said, the German broadcast doing that. That's all fear mongering and getting people ready. You know, they hate the Russians. You know, Russia sells gas to Germany and sell S-400s to Turkey. So there's a Turkish, German, and Russian soldier under your desk right now, Mike. It's sad, though. There is people that are scared because they're told by these people that are supposed to be what we call our leaders or professional, people in the media. And all they're doing is making us, we're being played the fools.
That you're exactly right. You're exactly right. Their job is not to keep us informed about what's going on, but to build the fear, to make us afraid of the countries the United States wants to attack, whether it's Saddam's nukes or Assad's sarin gas or the Russian threat. And you're absolutely right. The only one who's actually attacking other countries right now is the United States and its allies. And it's attacking countries in order to secure control over natural resources coveted by Western corporations, and to make sure that they will make sure their economies are linked through the Western economies and deal with the Western banks and be in debt to the Western private central banks. That's what this is all about, money and resources. And they're risking incinerating the surface of planet Earth in this argument over just whose brand of ink and paper we're going to be using for the next 100 years.
That's the last thing I want to say, Mike. How do you turn this off now? Like, these people are the cliques of the school you used to go to that hang out in their own group. Like, how do you turn this off? It's going to accelerate, and it's going to get worse and worse because you can't turn it off because that narrative is there already.
Yeah, I don't know. That's why I was down in the dumps last week here. I mean, the bug notwithstanding, it's frustrating. I've been at this for 25 years, and we're still on this course to war. And I think it's going to end very badly for the United States, but it's going to end very badly for a lot of people. It's certainly ending badly for the people in Yemen. It's ended badly for a lot of the people in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and everywhere the United States goes, the countries are being wrecked. And it's all to, just maximize corporate profits and gain access to resources.
Yep, we're a big wrecking ball. How sad is that? All right, Mike, get better. Have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Jim in New York. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. A couple of things. One thing I just heard an hour ago on a radio station that there's a trouble spot that you overlooked. In the section of Port-au-Prince in Haiti, where people have been, in reminiscence of the Tutuman coup of Papa Doc Duvalier, people are being hacked to death and burned alive by surrogates of the government. It's underreported. It's just coming out now. A pregnant woman was burned alive. Her son was hacked to death. Okay, I just wanted to point that out, but that wasn't my main point, although it's very serious. Just regarding that, where the Clintons, who raised hundreds of millions of dollars for Haiti, and just took it away. I think that the Clintons should be airdropped into Port-au-Prince and let the people deal with them. Now, another thing that I wanted to point out is that another thing I just heard is that El Salim, what he did live in Virginia, to go along with the previous caller, that he is being backed financially by the Friends of America, the United Arab Emirates, and Egypt. They are backing him financially, which is an interesting twist.
Yes.
And a third point I wanted to make was the difference between the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights. Because the Yom Kippur War initiated this conflict, and Israel was attacked surprisingly on Yom Kippur, and the tide turned, and they had the Egyptian Third Army surrounded in the Sinai Peninsula. The Israeli forces were on the banks of the Nile, and they were 10 miles from Damascus on the other side. And the Russians became jumpy, and they called up Kissinger, and they said, if this continues, we're going in, and we end up using nukes. The Kissinger cut off resupply to the Israeli army in the Sinai Peninsula, and things backed off. But what happened after that was, as we all know, there was the Accord, the peace treaty. It's a cold peace between Israel and Egypt, and Egypt got the Sinai back. But what happened between Israel and Syria has never conceded anything with regard to that war. Israel was forced to retreat,
Yes.
but they didn't retreat. They kept they kept the Golan Heights. So there's a state of war, and I don't think that Israel should actually be condemned for holding on even just for that reason.
Well, wait a minute. First of all, Israel didn't capture the Golan during the Yom Kippur War. It happened during the 6-Day War, where Israel basically struck first, insisting, "Oh, we know they're coming to attack us, and we have to preemptively attack them." And that's when they captured the Golan Heights, and then later on they annexed it, which has not been recognized by any international governments up until Donald Trump. And he's basically...
Okay, you're good. Point taken. You're right.
Okay, I criticize... I mean, look at the UN Charter, okay? No country has a right to attack another country just to seize territory. That is not supposed to happen. And yet, both in the Yom Kippur War and in the 6-Day War, that's what Israel was doing. Even though to this day they insist, oh, they were defensive wars, we had to go on in and defensively steal a huge part of their country.
Well, it's not a huge part. It's only a couple of square miles, really. But it's very.
There's a
area.
principle involved here. There's a principle involved.
Yeah. But it's a very small area, but it is a high area, and there were attacks being fired down from the Golan to Israel before that happened, and they feel that they can't get along with by giving it back.
Well, Israel can't get along with anybody in that part of the world. That's been the issue all along since its creation. You know, it doesn't want to recognize anybody else's right to exist, especially the Palestinians. Their attitude is, do what we say or we'll have our big brother, the United States, come whoop on you. I mean, I'm sorry. Look at the maps. Look at the maps of Israel versus Palestine going from the founding of Israel to today, and you will see who is wiping who off the map. And then if you add on the fact... If you add on the fact that Netanyahu is now campaigning on the fact of annexing the entire West Bank, with Donald Trump ready to rubber stamp that, then Netanyahu's campaign rhetoric right now is, he's going to erase Palestine from the map, because after that, they'll find a reason to go back into Gaza.
And there is an election starting in about 15 hours also in Israel.
Yes, that's right. And Netanyahu's Netanyahu's trailing in the polls, but his big campaign promise right now is if he is reelected, he is going to annex the entire West Bank, starting with the illegal settlements, who he says should be under Israeli sovereignty, not Palestinian. But he says ultimately he'll annex the entire West Bank, and Trump rubber stamps it, and Israel's going to act like it's a done deal. It's part of our country now.
And Mike, there's something else regarding the West Bank. The West Bank is the West Bank of the Jordan, and the East Bank is the other side, the Jordanian side. But there's a Jewish organization, like an activist organization that used to be very strong, Zionist, not religious. It was called Beitar. Have you heard of them?
No.
And their motto was the biblical promise of both sides of the Jordan, from Euphrates to El-Arish and halfway through the Sinai. Their motto was called both sides of the Jordan. The West Bank is the Israeli side of the Jordan, or whatever you want to call it. The other side
Eretz Israel. Eretz Israel. It's what the two stripes on the top and bottom of the Israeli flag mean. But, in the nuclear age, I find it very alarming to see countries still trying to define their foreign policy in terms of scriptures written by Bronze Age goat herders 2,000 years ago.
Well, Mike, there's one thing where I part ways with you on that for sure, is because what's happening in Israel is unexplainable in other than metaphysical terms. There's no way that you can.
It's very explainable. It's expansion of territory. It's seeking greater wealth, interfering in other countries' internal affairs. They use the religion as a cover to get their people to go along with it. But there's nothing metaphysical about it at all. It is the weakness and flaws of human beings, especially those in leadership positions.
Well, the point is that you do have the amazing world populations that are against it, I find it to be miraculous. And I find that without the conflict of the entire world,
Jim,
it would not be a miracle.
Jim.
Yeah.
Okay. If Israel would stop conducting itself as a nomadic Bronze Age tribe, move into the 21st century, and start engaging in trade and diplomacy, the rest of the world wouldn't hate it. The rest of the world is revulsed by what Israel does. It's Israel's behavior that is the issue. And Israel likes to say, oh, we can do whatever we want, and those who object to us, well, it's just anti-Semitism and Jew hate. No.
I look at Mike. I look at it as just refusing to lay down and die. That's the way I look at it.
They're not refusing to lay down and die. They're a nuclear power. Nobody's going to attack them. And as you pointed out earlier in the show, during the Yom Kippur War, they grabbed the Sinai. During the Six-Day War, they grabbed the Golan. Does that sound like a nation fighting for its survival, or a nation intent on, fulfilling the biblical prophecy of from the Nile to the Euphrates? Anyway, we're coming up on a commercial break, and before I let you go, I need to tell you, I did a quick scan over the news, including sites in Port-au-Prince itself. I'm not seeing anything about proxies for the government hacking people to death and setting them on fire.
Okay, I'll give you one thing to look up. Margaret Prescott.
Okay. But I'm looking at Port-au-Prince.com itself, which is their main news portal. The only concern they have is apparently there's some Canadians stranded at the Haiti, and they're being airlifted to the Port-au-Prince.
But you're looking at the government side. Look up Margaret Prescott, Haiti.
Well, how do we know we're not looking at a propaganda site then? They're not even talking about rioting here. There's no indication whatsoever. Okay, give me that name again. Margaret
Prescott.
All right, I'll take a look at that here, and we're going to let you go. Let's see.
I enjoyed the conversation.
All right, very good. Well, according to Wikipedia, Margaret Prescott is a short story writer. So.
No, WBAI Radio. It's in New York.
All right.
WBAI. Yeah.
All right, I'll check it out on this coming commercial break. I got to let you go. We got more callers waiting on the line. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Jim, I did my best. I went over to the website for WBAI Radio and the show Sojourner Truth, which is the show that Margaret Prescott hosts. I didn't see anything about current violence in Haiti. I went over to Margaret's website, which is actually very nice, and I used the search function. The only references I got to that kind of violence are back in 2016. I'm wondering if maybe you were hearing a rebroadcast, but I'm unable to confirm at this time. All right, let's go back to the phones here to Layla in Canada. Layla, long time no hear. What's on your mind?
I just wanted to talk about Beitar. I think it was your previous caller who referred to this Margaret Prescott as well, who talked about Beitar. Beitar was the fascist brown shirts that existed in Israel. They were led by Zev Jabotinsky, a Russian, and they were definitely not religious in any sense of the word. Obviously, they were fascist. In fact, they were closely aligned with Mussolini. There were many Jewish fascists in Italy itself. As for the reference to annexing the West Bank, from what I understand, the election is actually very close, but Netanyahu knows how to play the game, and he probably will somehow do anything that's significantly different, except he is not talking. West Bank has actually benefited, the people living in the West Bank have actually benefited greatly. The United Nations has used funds from the European Union and the U.S. to educate, finance, feed, and clothe and upgrade the people living in the West Bank. Many of them are now wealthier than the Americans who seem to still be crying crocodile tears for them. If anyone deserves sympathy, genuine pity, it's the people of Gaza. And I am from the West Bank. I've never been to Gaza, but from what I understand, the conditions there are unbearable. That is where sympathy should be focused.
I agree with you on that one. I agree with you on that one. We're going to be talking about Gaza in a little bit.
Great. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. Coming up on the top of the hour. Pardon me. All right, so let's talk about Venezuela, because so many war zones, so many conflict zones. We are in a world war. I mean, we haven't had a big event like Pearl Harbor to sort of take all these little wars and glue them together. But apparently, you know, when they're talking regional war in the Mideast, we are so close here. All right, so there's a story coming out of Truth Out, basically summarizing how the United States is taking all these illegal and dangerous actions towards regime change in Venezuela, starting with the propaganda that Maduro is an evil dictator, and he tap dances barefoot on shag carpeting, and he passes wind in the elevators, and so forth and so on. And then after that, Guido steps on in. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We're going to come back to Venezuela after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. So we're talking about Venezuela, and apparently plans to go into Venezuela began, as far as we know, last August. So in March of this year, Guido announced he was interim president and declared Operation Freedom, which was there to overthrow the Maduro government and would take certain tactical actions beginning on April 6th, which apparently we are now past. Part of the plan anticipates the Venezuelan military will turn against Maduro. That has not happened yet. Maduro does not have the support of the military. He does not have support of the general population. In fact, everywhere he goes, he requires protection because the Venezuelans are just attacking him. And we're not talking about organized protest groups. We're just talking about Venezuelans walking along the street. They see him in his car, and they just run up and pound on the car. So, apparently, the U.S. is realizing that Guido is not coming up to par, and according to this 75-page regime change manual prepared by the U.S. Global Development Lab, which is a branch of the U.S. Agency for International Development, how arrogant they're getting there, the manual advocates the creation of rapid expeditionary development teams, meaning soldiers, to partner with the CIA and U.S. Special Forces to conduct a mix of offensive, defensive, and stability operations in extremist conditions. It's going to turn into another Vietnam. Now, interestingly enough, the United States is once again warning Russia, you stay out of Venezuela. Don't you dare go in there. That's our backyard. At which point Russia could say, well, the Middle East is our backyard. Why didn't you get out of Syria first? Which, in fact, Russia said that. You leave Syria. We'll think about getting out of Venezuela. But interestingly enough, according to this headline in Newsweek, U.S. says the Russia standoff over Venezuela may get worse before it gets better. So the question is the U.S. really ready to do a military intervention in Venezuela, knowing that Russia is going to step in on the other side? Because Russia basically won in Syria. Alrighty, let's go back to the phones here. Art off the grid, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I just wanted to try to promote a movie that's in theaters right now.
Unplanned.
I think everybody needs to see this movie. It is about a woman named Abby Johnson. And this woman was the youngest clinic director in the history of Planned Parenthood. And it tells her true story of what changed her to become pro-life and stand against abortion. And if you have teenage children, you really should take them to see this. If you're pro-life, you should go see this. If you know someone who is pro-choice, but maybe there's a chance they could change their mind, you should take them to see this. This movie names names, and it actually tells the truth about Planned Parenthood, what they're all about and what their agenda is. I'm not the kind of guy to show his emotions or show when he's moved. But this movie had me in tears. What I saw tore me up inside. People, you really need to see this movie, and you need to tell everyone you know about this. This movie could well end the abortion debate once and for all.
Well, the movie, as I understand it, is called Unplanned. I haven't seen it myself yet. I know the corporate media is trying to ignore it with as much dignity as they can. I know that pro-abortion people on social media are trying to slam it, but I understand that it is doing very well, and people are going to see it, and word of mouth, such as you just called in with, is in fact convincing people they need to see this film. I'm certainly going to see it when it becomes available.
Well, I live in Georgia, and it played at one of the theaters in Evans, Georgia, and I went to see it Thursday. And I'll tell you, Mike, it was amazing. I was able to keep my composure until I finally got out to the truck. And as soon as I was in the truck and closed the doors, I fell apart. This movie is so moving.
I can hear that.
If you can make it through this movie without shedding a tear, you have no heart. Because it actually depicts in this movie what the doctors and the nurses actually see on the sonogram as this 6-week fetus fights for its life. It is the most dramatic thing I have ever seen in my life. And I encourage everyone, please, go see this movie. Thanks, man.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And I've been hearing all kinds of good things about Unplanned. Again, the pro-abortion people don't want you to see it. They're speaking out against it on social media. Corporate media is giving it zero coverage whatsoever. But I'm hearing that in the theaters in which it's playing, it's doing very, very well. Wasn't able to get a widespread distribution deal. At some point, it'll be on cable. At some point, it may even be on the internet. But yeah, it's a contentious issue. And some of the things that people are saying about the abortion issue are just disgusting. We'll get into that a little bit later in the show. All righty, getting on back here to Venezuela. Apparently, experts have begun to unravel how the cyber attacks against Venezuela's electricity system were carried out, and they've determined so far that, first of all, it was U.S. actors working through channels in Colombia and Chile. And apparently it did involve the injection of viruses into the electrical system, and hopefully they'll harden their systems against that sort of thing. But yeah, that's the U.S.'s bringing down an entire country's electrical system. So all you other countries out there on Earth, pay attention, because the U.S. can do it to you and will do it to you if you let them. So now's the time to start hardening your systems. Alrighty, over on Fox News, they have this segment called Authentic Voices, and they had this person up there saying, my mother left Venezuela in the 1980s because under Hugo Chavez, socialism was rampant. It was ruining the country. Oh, feel sorry for this situation. Well, Fox News, I hate to bust you on this. Hugo Chavez didn't get into power until 1998. So shame on you, Fox News. You get 3 Pinocchios for that one. Remember Pat Robertson? He's supposed to be this Christian minister. And he's now out there on video. It's on whatreallyhappened.com. He's calling on the U.S. military to take out Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro with a drone strike. So whatever happened to thou shalt not kill, Pat? That's what I want to know. Okay. Okay. Now, getting on over to Israel. Story coming out of Jerusalem Post. Netanyahu is apparently saying that Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid will win the elections. He said this on an interview to Radio 103 FM on Sunday. And Netanyahu claimed that the Blue and White Party is leading by several mandates. Netanyahu also warned that if Likud does not win the elections, the citizens of Israel will wake up with Yair Lapid as prime minister. Well, it's between the right and the far right, and it's not really going to change all that much for the Palestinians, except that Gantz and Lapid are not talking about annexation. Netanyahu is. And Netanyahu is out there again campaigning. He's ruling out a Palestinian state. He's courting the right-wing voters, saying he's going to annex the West Bank, starting with the illegal settlements, and then eventually all of it. And excuse for that is saying that even if the settlements are illegal, they shouldn't be living under Palestinian sovereignty. In fact, Palestinian sovereignty is dead. You know, this coming from the government that has been justifying its abuse of the people of Gaza and the West Bank by saying the Palestinians want to take us off the map. They want to push us into the ocean. So the elections are going to be starting very, very soon. And in fact, let's see what time it is in Jerusalem. Because... oh, okay. I will correct that. Last night I watched that Discovery Channel thing about opening the mummy on live TV, and just out of curiosity, I went to Twitter just to look. I didn't even post, and all of a sudden I'm getting Twitter stuff. Okay, it's just after midnight in Jerusalem, so 8 hours before the elections start, or something along that line. Over in the West Bank, 2 entire Palestinian villages have received demolition orders from Israeli authorities, one in Hebron and one in Bethlehem. And this is 9 residential structures, in addition to caravans and animal barns, have been ordered to be destroyed in the village of Tuwana in Masar Yada. And again, the justification is they don't have the necessary Israeli permit for the structures. And therefore the occupation authorities claim the right to destroy the buildings. For the third time, settlers have locked shut a mosque in occupied Jerusalem. And apparently the official responsible for opening and closing the mosque was surprised by the presence of an adhesive on the door to the Sheikh Maki Mosque in the old city of occupied Jerusalem, and apparently nails had also been used to lock the door shut. Witnesses added that the settlers attacked the mosque twice last month. Again, adhesive materials on the door to keep it closed during prayer time. Normally the mosque opens at noon and closes after evening prayers. How petty. How trivial here. Story coming on out of truthout.org. The International Association of Democratic Lawyers have presented a petition from the International Lawyers Campaign for the Investigation and Prosecution of Crimes Committed Against the Palestinian People to Fatou Bensouda, Chief Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. The petition urges Bensouda to initiate a full investigation and prosecute violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law committed by Israeli officials in the occupied Palestinian territories. The petition has garnered the support of tens of thousands of lawyers worldwide. The anger is building. We sit here watching these horrific atrocities being committed against unarmed protesters by, snipers from armored locations, and they're saying, we're defending ourselves, we're defending ourselves, we're defending ourselves. This story from Al Jazeera, and it's talking about the continuing fallout from the United Nations Human Rights Council's Commission of Inquiry talking about the Great March of Return and pointing out that Israeli snipers intentionally fired on civilians who presented no danger to them. They shot protesters, medics, journalists, disabled people, and children, and overwhelmingly were aiming for the lower limbs, using these very high-powered bullets that can kill somebody up to 1 kilometer away, and of course they're just, a few hundred yards. And at one point they were using these so-called butterfly bullets. And so these serious leg wounds require amputation. They require multiple surgeries to try and get the healing started. Treatment can take a total of 2 years for all these people. So Israel is trying to maim Gaza into silence. And then Israel wonders why the rest of the world is appalled. Over in Iran, as you're probably aware, they've had massive, massive rains, and they are having floods, even worse than we're having here in the United States of America. At least 70 people are dead, and some 1,900 communities have been totally flooded. Countries around the world are reaching out to the Iranian Red Crescent saying, we want to send you financial aid. We want to help you deal with this disaster. And they're all being blocked by the U.S. sanctions. The U.S. government will not relax the sanctions to allow foreign aid in to deal with the flood victims. So you think about that one for a while. Iranian Parliament Speaker Ali Larijani says that the ruthless policies adopted by President Trump during his term in office, of which the previous story is one, have created a tense situation in the world, undermining the global order and international peace. And Ali, when you've got it right, you've got it right. That's exactly what's happening. Larijani referred to the U.S. withdrawal from its INF treaty with Russia, its trade war in China and other European countries, its withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement, and the Iran nuclear deal, and its ruthless behaviors in Jerusalem, Al-Quds, and the occupied Palestinian territories. Said such behaviors have undermined peace and security in the world. And he's right about that one, except for the Paris Climate Accord. That's the one I actually agree with getting out of, because that's based on a gigantic hoax. Okay. Now getting on back here. Here's where it gets kind of interesting. The United States is now designating Iran's Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist organization. Now that's a little hard to sell, because if you've ever seen videos of Iran's Revolutionary Guards, they're a uniformed military unit, trained and disciplined with a chain of command. Now, the reason for this seems to be that Iran is trying to send some financial support to Syria, and the U.S. has already declared Syria a terrorist organization, or some component of Syria a terrorist organization. So, well, if you're helping out the people that we say are terrorists, then you're terrorists too. But if Trump keeps pushing, we are going to be in World War III for real. We're just so close. Right now, we are just so close. Over in the Western Pacific, things are heating up there. In the Philippines, Duterte is threatening to destroy China if China interferes with the Philippines Navy in the South China Sea. So we're building up to a confrontation there as well. South Korea's President Moon Jae-in is planning to ask Donald Trump to ease sanctions on Kim Jong-un. And basically, Moon plans to embrace the risk of personal diplomacy by asking Trump to grant reciprocal measures after Seoul and Washington laid out the necessary groundwork via working-level discussions. So Moon Jae-in is trying to help Donald Trump understand the problem, that easing of sanctions and disarmament have to go hand in hand, one after the other after the other. Trump is not going to get any points in North Korea with this attitude of you give us everything we want first, and then we'll do something nice for you. Because North Korea has no guarantees the United States will keep its word, because the United States has broken its word so many times. Again, with all the treaties they pulled out of. Okay, we got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And let's turn to our domestic politics, because there's a lot going on there as well. It is now coming on out that Hillary's campaign manager was pushing that fake Russia collusion story at the Democratic National Convention, the very same day the FBI launched the Trump-Russia investigation. So the DNC was in on it. This all came down from Hillary. We know that Hillary started pushing Trump-Russia collusion within 24 hours after she lost the election. But they were trying to set the stage for this at the actual convention, saying that, you know, again, Russia was interfering with the election, that they'd hacked DNC emails, which we know they didn't. The metadata doesn't line on up. And it's just amazing. Now, Congressman Devin Nunes said that he will issue as many as 24 criminal referrals to the Department of Justice relating to misconduct during the Trump-Russia investigation. And Nunes said the American people need to have confidence in the FBI and the Department of Justice, so we're working on the referrals. Now, he was on Sean Hannity's show. Yeah, it would be nice if we could have confidence in the FBI and the Department of Justice after so many failings, going all the way back to COINTELPRO. I think that's going to be a hard order. Here is the problem. Okay, Nunes can submit the criminal referrals to the Department of Justice, but it will be up to William Barr if there are going to be actual indictments and prosecutions. And here's where we get to find out just whose side William Barr is on. Okay, John Solomon is out there saying his sources inside the FISA court are saying that the second half of 2019 will be a year of accountability, will bring a lot of people to justice. I keep hearing that. I'm not seeing it happen. I remember back in 2016, we were all cheering, lock her up, lock her up, lock her up. And Trump said, yeah, if I was president, you'd be in jail. He's president. She's not in jail. Oh, and there's a new scandal. Apparently, Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, was caught stealing some of the furniture and lamps and things from the Secretary of State, Department of Justice. She's still stealing furniture from the American people. She doesn't own that stuff. So what are they going to do now that Russia collusion has collapsed? Are they going to hang their heads in shame? Probably not. Are they going to say, we're sorry? Probably not. Are they going to say, we promise we won't do it again? Definitely not. They're probably already searching for the next great hoax, the next big lie, something that they can throw on to Trump, anything that they can find. Trump is actually a Chinese asset. We were just looking in the wrong direction. So the Democrats are basically engaging, they're trying for a scorched earth policy going into 2020. And they're so monomaniacally focused on this that the Democrats are proving themselves incapable of addressing the real challenges facing our country. They've turned our Congress, they've turned the entire city of Washington, D.C., into a somewhat more dignified pro-wrestling ring. It's amazing here. Beto O'Rourke is out there speechifying. As you know, he's running for 2020. And, okay, sorry about that. Beto O'Rourke, first of all, came on out and said that Netanyahu's a racist, and I think AIPAC is not going to be calling him any longer. But he came out with this more bizarre situation, comparing the Electoral College to slavery. And he wants it abolished. Now, the fact of the matter is that the vast majority of the population of the United States actually lives in some very tight, compacted areas. I think it's something like about 20 different counties. And that's why we have the Electoral College. But Hillary still can't get over the fact that she won the popular vote and lost the electoral vote. Those are the rules. That's how it's played. Both sides knew it going on in. And then afterwards, Hillary wanted to change the rules here. All right. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is under fire again for a bunch of things. Apparently, she was in an interview talking about military defense, and she was munching popcorn, wiping her hands on her pants. But apparently, last Friday, she was addressing a black audience, and she tried to fake an accent to pander to them, and it blew up in her face. More about that when we come back from these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Pardon me. We're talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And apparently last Friday, she was addressing a black audience, and she tried to affect an accent. And African Americans condemned her for doing so. And Alexandria initially claimed that those who were calling her out for the accent were trying to distort and deflect, and it was all just a conspiracy theory. Well, no, it wasn't, because it was on video. And now she's out there saying that she had to code switch the speech because there would be costs associated for not doing it. I don't even know what that is supposed to mean. But this congresswoman, who regularly refers to those on the political right as racists, white supremacists, and xenophobes, added it was hurtful that people would criticize her for using an accent. And I saw another little blurb racing by on the bars here, where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is out there saying, "Why are older men so obsessed with me? Is this really the best that we can do for Congress?" All right. Now, last Friday, somebody started a rumor, apparently unfounded, that WikiLeaks had announced that the Ecuadorian embassy in London was about to eject Julian Assange within hours, if not days, and that they'd already made an arrangement for the British police to come and arrest him. This was immediately denied by the Ecuadorian embassy, and I'm wondering what's going on, who's playing games here. But one of the games that they like to play with Julian Assange is, say, oh, he's not a journalist. He's not a journalist, because every time you get into this debate about why he faces prosecution, they say, oh, he's not really a journalist. And therefore he can't do this. Well, the problem is there is, in fact, nothing in the Constitution, or for that matter, even the law, that says what constitutes a real journalist or not. The real issue here is Title 18. Now, had Julian Assange solicited classified information, then he'd be in trouble. But he was the recipient of a leak. And if you go back to the Pentagon Papers, that's exactly what happened at the Washington Post and the New York Times. They were given leaked documents. They didn't ask for them. They just showed up. And they realized they had something important the American people needed to know. And Assange is the same way. That's what WikiLeaks does. They promise anonymity to whistleblowers. They get the information, they make it public. And therefore, the Supreme Court decision in Nixon versus Washington Post, New York Times applies here. The Founding Fathers gave the press the freedom they need to serve the American people, to fulfill their important role in our democracy. The press was designed to serve the governed, not the governors. Now, if Assange is ejected and he's arrested, I hope his lawyers are smart enough to realize that is the strongest way to move forward, because I don't think you're going to see the Supreme Court, no matter how compromised they are, going on back and reversing that historic decision. Now, speaking of whistleblowers, there's a study that just came on out. There's apparently an office in the Pentagon itself that deals with whistleblower complaints. Apparently, they're getting something like 6 a day of people coming forward and saying, you've got to look into this. They're just wasting the money. There's malfeasance. There's ill behavior. 6 per day over at the Pentagon here. All right, getting on into the economic news here. Trump and Pelosi are both catering to private health insurance, and Trump is working on his new great health care plan and opposition to Medicare, and Pelosi's defense of the Affordable Care Act, and basically they're both aimed at garnering support from the private insurance industry. Private insurance industry loves ACA. And I think the private insurance industry is saying that Trump's great health care plan could be Obamacare 2.0. Story coming on out of Blacklisted News. Is the EU reneging on its commitment to bank bail-ins? And apparently there was this provisional agreement struck between the European Commission and the Italian government to reimburse some investors who bought shares in failed banks. And this could soften EU rules on bank rescues. Now, these rules represent the central plank of the EU's post-crisis banking reform. They came into law in the wake of Europe's sovereign debt crisis, were designed to make sure that collapsing banks in Europe would in the future be resolved with the funds of stockholders, bondholders, and other investors, including account holders with deposits of more than 100,000 euros, instead of classic bailouts that raid indirectly taxpayer funds. So that's basically, that's the direction the banks are going to. If you are a customer of a bank, you're not a customer anymore. You're an unsecured investor. And if the bank gets in trouble, your money can be taken. Just like that. Because we have to save the banks. The banks are gods incarnate. Or they're the temples to God incarnate, which is wealth. China is boosting their bullion reserves as they're getting ready for their anti-dollar push. They increased their gold holdings for the 4th straight month in March. Total reserves are now 60.62 million ounces. And this is part of their China strategy to shift away from the U.S. dollar. So last month's inflow, March alone, totaled 11 tons of bullion, which followed the 9.95 tons in February, 11.8 tons in January, 9.95 tons in December. I can't even imagine what that much gold would look like. Okay. Here's an article, and it's rather interesting. This is coming out from Investment Watch blog, and it's asking an important question. Is America losing its grip on the world economy? And I would say, yes, it is. The more the U.S. tries to impose dollar hegemony on the rest of the world, the more the world moves away. These trade wars aren't working. The tariffs aren't working. The sanctions aren't working. Now, Trump made it a promise of his president to stop the U.S. being abused as the world's piggy bank. But not all foreign powers seem to be going along with his assertive style of foreign economic policy, because apparently his way of stopping the rest of the world from using the U.S. as a piggy bank is for the U.S. to use the rest of the world as a piggy bank. and the rest of the country isn't all that happy about that. So what's going on over there? Right now, the U.S. is doing a lot of arm twisting, trying to basically force other countries to buy American. And one of the big battlegrounds, of course, is Huawei. And Washington is trying to scare other countries into dropping Chinese telecoms from supplying 5G network equipment. 5G is the coming thing. I know the 4G providers don't like that. That's why you're always seeing all these bogus emails about 5G is going to kill you. 5G will make your ears fall off. But Washington is saying Beijing could capture any data transferred through Huawei devices at will. But both Germany and Great Britain have refused to bar Huawei from participating in tenders, with Berlin publicly rebuking Washington by saying that it has its own security standards. Here is the question. Who do you want to be spied on? The United States government or by China? Because we can assume that pretty much all large countries are coercing their technology firms to put in backdoors. We know the U.S. has been doing it for a very long time. Remember the NSA key scandal with Windows NT? They've been doing it all along. So apparently Washington failed in this effort because they really didn't have any evidence that Huawei was going to do anything like that. Of course, the other problem is the United States currently does not have a 5G provider that can compete with Huawei. That's one way that we're losing it. Okay. Over in the European Union, they're trying to basically break the monopolies of our social media. They're trying to regulate Facebook and Twitter. And the European Union has gone to court for years against these American giants' legal terms. And they're losing. Apparently, a lot more places around the world are saying that Uber is not welcome. There have been anti-Uber protests in Chile. And currently, Uber is locked out from China, Turkey, much of the European Union. Nord Stream is proceeding despite U.S. efforts to block it. And that will tie Europe and Germany much closer to Russia than to the United States. Then we have this inevitable debate, the S-400 versus the F-35, where Turkey said, no, you can keep your F-35s. We're going to go with the S-400. First of all, the F-35 isn't doing all that well. And as I mentioned earlier, one must be suspicious of weapons provided to sort of lukewarm allies, that they don't contain self-destructs in there, that there isn't something in there that the U.S. could use to knock down the missiles should Turkey ever resist a U.S. invasion. Okay. All right. And I think that was the end of this one. So let's go back to the phones. James in Sacramento, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Brother Michael, aloha. You know, the first thing I want to say is you look a lot better.
Thank you.
I'm glad you had some time to take off. And, yeah. But the other thing I was going to say, when you were talking about Hillary Clinton, are we still working here?
Yeah, we're still on. You're on the air.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, you know, Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, you know, over all the years and all those stuff they've done, and it's actually been, you know, there's no debate around it. It's actually proven, and then they've gotten off from, you know, being arrested and you know, put in prison. But the whole thing is, for me, and I say this to my friends whenever they talk about Hillary and Bill, I'm like, okay, so put her in prison, you know, and then put Bill in prison too, and put them both in the same cell.
Oh, that would be good.
That would be...
The sparks would fly. The sparks would fly. Well, you know, I want
to see who's alive after the first year.
You know, we know from the Clinton Foundation's own filings, they don't qualify to be a 501c3, and yet they still are. And, you know, obviously the Clintons have got a tremendous amount of juice. And, you know, of course, the Clintons wrecked Claire in my life 25 years ago. And that's part of my frustration. I thought by now there would have been some kind of resolution on the murder of Vince Foster.
Well, I mean, what about what Clinton was doing when he was in when he was the governor of
Arkansas,
flying Arkansas, exactly, yeah, and he was flying in all the drugs and flying out all the guns, and I mean, you know, Bill Clinton is as guilty as Hillary, and both of them are totally capable of murder without ever losing a night of sleep. They won't lose a night of sleep over it, you know?
Yeah, they really do things. I mean, that story about Hillary, you know, looting the State Department for furniture for her residence. I mean, that just shows the attitude right there. We are untouchable. We can do whatever we want.
Yeah, Bill Clinton, you know, raiding the Social Security department and saying he balanced the budget.
Yeah, that was another one that he did. And
oh my God, it's just crazy. And anyway, my whole point is put them both in the same cell.
Yeah, that would be a suitable fit punishment, I think. It absolutely would be. But again, if the Clinton Foundation's 501c3 status was revoked, then Bill and Hillary would become personally liable for the taxes on all that money.
All that money should be confiscated, just like we do with other countries when we confiscate their money. And the RICO Act, exactly. There you go. Yeah.
Well, the laws are just for us little people, unfortunately. We live in a country where
unfortunately.
It's even worse than the old Soviet Union, you know, where those top leaders, the commissars, the people on the Politburo, they could do whatever they want. Nothing ever happened to them. They had their own private hospitals with better medicine and better doctors. That's where we are.
Yeah, and you're going to tell your people that you're a socialist state, so everybody's equal.
Yep. Well, you know, the funny thing is the Soviet Union made an absolute mockery of the Marxist vision by creating the most powerful ruling class in history. And we seem to have the same thing here in the United States. There's nothing the American people seem able to do to get this country off this ridiculous course we're on right now. We're going to get into a world war, and I'm convinced we're going to lose it. And we're going to lose it badly.
Yeah, but who's going to wind up sucking wind on it? You know, I mean, all of the small people or anybody that's actually got, you know, tons of money, and they're going to wind up being on just like the oligarchs in the Soviet Union. You know.
Well, you need to remember that following the rise of the Russian republics, Putin kicked the oligarchs out. For the most part. They had to move on down to Israel, and they were not happy with that. It's one of the reasons why the West turned against Putin. Anyway, James, got to let you go. Got to take another break for commercials.
All right, brother, yeah.
We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And apparently, Donald Trump's latest Federal Reserve Board pick, Herman Cain, says we need a dollar as good as gold. Yes, he's right. And the problem is other members of the Federal Reserve have said the same thing. Alan Greenspan, before he was named chairman to the Federal Reserve Board, was a gold bug. Wanted the dollar locked solidly to gold to keep it stable. Once he was inside the Federal Reserve, complete 180. Oh yeah, we just got these printing machines. We'll just keep doing that. They're in a real corner over there. Okay, now here's an interesting little story. This came out over the weekend, and it involves something called the NOPEC bill. And it's a piece of U.S. legislation that would allow the Justice Department to take antitrust action against OPEC for manipulating the oil market. And specifically, the bill would remove sovereign immunity countries have from such action, allowing the U.S. government to sue. And in theory, the law would prevent OPEC from coordinating production cuts. Now, it's unclear if the bill will pass. It's also not guaranteed Trump would sign the bill if it reaches his desk. But Saudi Arabia, according to this story that came out of oilprice.com, Saudi Arabia threatened to use the nuclear option of selling their oil for currencies other than the dollar if the U.S. government goes ahead with the NOPEC law. Now, Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Energy, Industry, and Mineral Resources is denying this, but we'll see what happens. Maybe they received assurances the NOPEC bill is not, in fact, going to pass here. All right. Over the weekend, Trump fired Department of Homeland Security Chief Kirstjen Nielsen. The story originally was that she tendered her resignation. Then apparently a little bit later, Trump was saying no, that he demanded her resignation. There had apparently been a very contentious meeting in the White House. And apparently Trump's issue with Kirstjen was that nothing is getting done. So at the moment, Kevin McAleenan is now serving as the acting Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. One of the things that's really bothering me is apparently, remember last week Trump was saying, I'm going to close that border. If you, Mexico, do not stop these migrant hordes, I'm going to close the border next week, including for all commerce. Trump apparently, reportedly, has backed off on that one, saying he will give Mexico 1 year to figure out a way to stop the migrant hordes. Meanwhile, they're still hoarding across our border. Does Trump not understand these are going to be used as Democratic voters? All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. Back with hour number 3 after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And apparently there's some major shakeups going on over at the White House because the director of the United States Secret Service, Randolph Tex Alice, is being removed from his position. This was announced on CNN. Now, 2 weeks ago, there'd been some talk about there was going to be a transition in leadership, and he was asked to stay on until there was a replacement. But apparently it was just announced today, and Secret Service officials have been caught by surprise. Now, we're talking about the entire Secret Service, not just the protective detail. Most people, when they hear Secret Service, they think about the bodyguards around the President of the United States. Secret Service is also involved in the detection of counterfeiting. And it's a much bigger operation than just the protective detail. So apparently, Trump has picked James M. Murray, a career Secret Service official, to replace Alice. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. Jeff in St. Paul, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I worked later today because of all the NCAA people, and I was listening on my iPad, and when I was getting close to home, it crashed, and then I went upstairs to my apartment, and I listened on my old iPhone, and it's crashed 10 times, sometimes less than 30 seconds after it starts up.
Well, Spectrum, unfortunately, once again, is having problems today.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's cool. Other than that, how are you feeling? The weekend good for you?
Well, the weekend was good. You know, I'm dealing with a bug, so you know, hopefully by the end of the week I'll be fine.
All right, I'll look. Listen, thanks a lot. Yeah.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And we're going to do that. Okay, I have to do some tech stuff here a little bit. And here we are. Okay, So we're talking about immigration, and illegal immigration levels may reach 500,000 over the next 3 months. So illegal immigration at the United States-Mexico border could more than double from current rates in the next 3 months alone, as President Trump postpones action on the issue for a year. Thursday, Trump backed away from previous threats he would shut down the border, now giving Mexico a year to clamp down on illegal immigration and drug trafficking before he takes any action against the country. Once again, he's showing how weak he is. Tucker Carlson actually came out with an interesting observation the other day on his show. He's speculating that Trump is actually tired of being president, and he doesn't want to just resign. So his elegant way out is to just lose in 2020. And Tucker Carlson made the point that Trump is alienating his base that put him into office back in 2016. We certainly know he's ignored the independent media that helped him, turned his back on him. He's, dropped the ball on vaccine safety, dropped the ball on election integrity. Now he's dropping the ball on immigration. Tucker Carlson may have something there. That Trump got to be the president, he got to play golf, he got to, be in the White House. Okay. Thank you very much. Getting on back to the world situation, as you know, Brexit is still way, way up in the air. Theresa May is asking for yet another extension. The British people are getting restive. Spain has come on out, basically throwing a monkey wrench into the works by imposing all kinds of very hard conditions on any more delays to Brexit. So it's, well, Theresa, all I can say is you wanted the job. Now, there is actually a government minister who's responsible for no-deal planning at the Brexit Department. Chris Heaton-Harris, Member of Parliament, was Parliamentary Undersecretary of State at the Department for exiting the European Union until he resigned on April 3rd in response to Theresa May announcing she would request a second Brexit delay. But he did make the point of saying that Britain is officially ready for a no-deal Brexit. And it's just, they're dragging the heels. Now, the EU just doesn't want this at all. Story coming out of Breitbart. The European Union is now launching its own online fact checker to fight Europhobics. And it's out there to combat the spread of so-called fake news ahead of May's European elections. Everybody's trying to censor the internet now. Censor social media. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. The thing is, who uses those fact-checking systems? I mean, if somebody's going to a Europhile fact-checking system, they're already in favor of the EU and Remain. I think most of these things are probably going to turn out to be a rather large waste of money, except, of course, for the ones that are forced on you through browsers. Getting on back to that bribery scandal, the admissions bribery scandal, apparently the first student who benefited from that has now been removed. Stanford has rescinded the admission of a female student whose application was submitted with falsified sailing credentials. Apparently Stanford likes people who can handle a boat, and she's now going to have to go to some other school here. All right, story out of Investment Watch Blog. How does Twitter get rid of conservative tweets? Well, they've been partnering with all of these various ultra-left-wing organizations, but that may be changing because, as you know, the Southern Poverty Law Center got hit with a number of scandals. Morris Dees had to step down. Their other officials have been fired for unspecified conduct reasons. Some of the people in the SPLC have gone public saying that they've got huge amounts of money and that it's a very unhealthy working environment in there. So as of now, Twitter has severed relations with him. Twitter is now saying the SPLC is not a member of Twitter's Trust and Safety Council. So that's how we can go after some of these left-wing censors. We scandalize them. We discredit them. We make it an embarrassment for social media to be involved with them. Okay. Yeah, I'm getting some. First of all, we understand that the stream from RBN is working just fine. It's on a system called Rivero, but I am getting emails saying that the YouTube streams are failing. Now, interestingly enough, from here, the YouTube stream is flowing smoothly. But again, Spectrum just has outages all over the country. And it's another reminder that our country is sinking into third world disrepair. Over in Great Britain, they want to levy huge fines on websites that refuse to remove disinformation and fake news, with obviously the British government getting to decide what is disinformation and fake news. So the days of the free and open internet, at least for now, appear to be over. Maybe it's time to start hanging out on the darknet. See if there's a social media service on the darknet that's free from all this kind of stuff. All right. We had a caller about this earlier in the show, about this pro-life movie, Unplanned. And it dominates the box office in the theaters where it's playing. It had a huge win despite a controversial R rating, which means you can't, in fact, take your teenagers to it, a media blackout, and Twitter persecution that does not seem to end. So, see, I'm an old-fashioned American. I say, let people look at the movie, and if they agree with it, fine, and if they don't agree with it, fine. Please do not decide to make decisions and choices on my behalf, because that is not freedom. That is dictatorship and tyranny. Now, getting on back to abortions, you're going to love this one. Stacey Abrams, who still won't concede her gubernatorial election, was screaming about this new bill called House Bill 481, which wants to reduce the window of abortions in Georgia from 20 weeks to 6 weeks. And it's one of these new heartbeat bills, that if you can detect a heartbeat, the baby cannot be aborted. And Stacey Abrams, in reference to all of these Hollywood stars who are saying, by golly, they're going to boycott Georgia's film industry if this bill gets passed. Stacey Abrams is out there saying, you know, it's a call to action. I do not support a boycott of our state, and saying that protecting babies from being aborted is bad for business. So, over in Ohio, they're considering approving constitutional carry. That would be a good thing. Over in Ethiopia, investigators are demanding a review of the Boeing 737 MAX flight control system. And apparently the full report has been released. Boeing is coming on out with the usual polite things. We want to reiterate our deepest sympathies with the family and loved ones of those who lost their lives in the accident. And again, it looks like exactly the same problem took down the Ethiopian flight and the Lion Air flight. And Boeing stock, of course, is way down. Sales are being canceled for the 737 MAX already. This is probably not going to bode well for the 777X. And as if that were not bad enough, apparently over in China, multiple Boeing 787s had to be grounded after this GPS rollover glitch. You remember the Y2K scare that went nowhere? That because calendar chips and computers were hardwired with that first 19, that when the millennium happened, everything would skip back 100 years. And it turned out No, it really didn't. Well, apparently, on GPS devices, for some reason, there is a 20-year, I guess, count on the weeks. And there's a rollover from week 1024 to week 1. And apparently it affects a lot of GPS systems like a Garmin or a TomTom. And they're concerned because the GPS system in the Boeing 787 may also have this, and they've been grounded. So anyway, the glitch was only expected to affect older GPS systems or ones that had not been updated. So apparently 787s in other parts of the world are doing just fine, but the 787s in China had not been updated, and that's why they had the problem. Alrighty. Over in Brunei, you're going to love this one. The British military has been called on to strip the Sultan of Brunei of honorary appointments awarded to him by Queen Elizabeth as a backlash against Brunei's new anti-LGBT laws. And so the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force are under pressure to rescind these honorary military titles bestowed on the Sultan. And apparently this was triggered last Wednesday when Brunei introduced death by stoning as a punishment for homosexuality after Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah made several reforms to the country's penal code, which is based on Islamic Sharia law. Alrighty. Over at Great Britain, there is one and only one National Health Service transgender clinic. 5 workers have quit and blown the whistle, saying that children as young as 3 are being sent through this gender reassignment treatment. I'm sorry, if they're 3-year-old, they don't know what gender they are. They have no idea what's being done to them. I'm sure mommy and daddy have told them they're a boy or a girl, and then somebody gets a hold of them, somebody at school or somebody at the clinic saying, oh, you're not really a boy or a girl. You can be whatever you want to be, and we'll just chop you up and make you into what you want to be. But these clinicians from the Gender Identity Development Center clinic based in London and Leeds left over concerns children were being incorrectly diagnosed with gender dysphoria. Well, one reason may be that if the children are just sent home, there's no money. If they are sent through the hormone treatments and the surgery, there's money. Specialists are worried some of the youngsters were being referred and pressured into having gender trade treatment after suffering homophobic bullying. It's just a mess here. Oh, and you're going to love this one. This is over in Illinois. Apparently, there was a situation where a student allegedly wrote a note in the bathroom, in a bathroom stall, threatening a school shooting. Now, first of all, I hate to see such behavior be normalized. And I hope that they would take some kind of strict disciplinary action with this student who wrote the note, if they know who he is. But apparently this school's administration's answer to this crisis was to remove all the doors from all the bathroom stalls, which means when you're in there doing what you're doing, people can look in and see what it is that you're doing. And apparently girls are now bringing blankets from home to preserve their modesty and privacy. I think that is definitely over the top here. Alrighty. This one is kind of weird. We all know Charlie Brown. We all grew up with Charlie Brown, just had a great deal of charm. We all got his books. We waited for the Sunday comics to read the latest Charlie Brown. We saw the TV specials for Christmas and everything. How can you not have a problem? How can you have a problem with Charlie Brown? Well, apparently somebody did. There is a legal wrangling, which is coming to head right now. And it has to do with a government-owned facility in Michigan. And this facility is being asked to provide a written apology to 2 residents of a senior center whose personal comments about Christmas were censored. Now, the letter from First Liberty Institute asks for the apology to Joan Wilson and Wilma Wells, residents of the Kalkaska Senior Living Center in Kalkaska, Michigan. And apparently during last year's holiday season, the seniors read to children who visited from that health center's Child Development Center and preschool's Great Start Readiness program. Apparently one resident read Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas without incident. The other one apparently read excerpts from A Charlie Brown Christmas and then asked the children if they knew why we celebrate Christmas, and one of the teachers accompanying the students said, no, we won't go there. We're not allowed to talk about that. I guess she was thinking these are all future Muslims. Alrighty. Apparently, you've probably seen all these shows on Discovery Channel about cloning the mammoth, where they're going out and trying to find usable, recoverable DNA from a woolly mammoth. And they get closer and they get closer and they get closer. Well, apparently, in this last very well-preserved woolly mammoth, it's 28,000 years old, these cells are showing biological signs of life. Doesn't mean they have DNA, doesn't mean they can clone. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here. And getting on through here, there's been this electric car breakthrough. Apparently there's a new battery coming from Inolith AG, and it's an inorganic battery technology, and they've announced the world's first 1,000 watt-hour per kilogram rechargeable battery. That is a lot of energy per kilogram here. And it's been developed in the company's German laboratory, and it would enable a range of up to 621 miles of range on a single charge in an electric car. That would be just absolutely amazing. I remember when BBC's Top Gear, when it was still with the original cast, they did a show on electric cars, and of course, Jeremy Clarkson, being a petrol head, was very down on the electric car and just going on and on about how often you had to stop and recharge it. And the batteries have always been kind of a weak link in the electric car technology. But the batteries are now catching on up. This probably has implications beyond electric cars, because one of the issues that you have with solar power and windmills is where do you store the surplus power until you really need it. So it's moving forward. Now, personally, I think electric cars are the wave of the future. And I also understand there's another type of battery out there. It's a lithium air battery that's doing great as well. All righty. Okay, this is a funny story. We're into the science stuff right now. As you know, there's a lot of people asking, is there life out there in space? Of course, we already know from Viking, yes, there is. Apparently, they're having a big problem on the International Space Station because it is a closed environment. It's not like they can open the windows and air it out during spring cleaning. And apparently it's developed quite a healthy population of various bacterial scums, if you will, mold, to the point where it's actually starting to corrode some of the metal on the station. So that probably was something that wasn't really being thought about a lot when the station was being built. But hopefully it'll be thought about a little in the future. Now, NASA wants to go back to the moon. And according to this story from the Express in Great Britain, for whatever it's worth, there are serious suggestions that one of the returns to the moon go back to the landing site of the Apollo 11 and recover one of the bags of human waste that was left on the moon in order to see how the microbes and germs inside have survived or adapted. Maybe. I'm just going to take a guess here. With the solar wind and the proton bombardment, I'm going to say no, they didn't. People are still talking about that Indian satellite test, and NASA has told India that blowing up one of its own satellites with a ballistic missile was a terrible thing that created 400 pieces of space debris. They're in a high inclination orbit. Now, India did do one thing that was smart. The satellite that was the target was coming up from the south, and the interceptor came from the north. So hopefully very few pieces went into permanent orbit, but they are going to be coming down, probably have been coming down for the last few days. But Jim Bridenstine, head of NASA, said some of the debris is actually possibly creating a threat to the International Space Station. Bridenstine said the explosion had created 60 pieces of debris large enough to track, meaning 6 inches or larger, and of those, 24 are moving into a position where they could threaten the ISIS. Told you it's a bad idea to have war in space. What can I do? What can I tell you? All right. Hackers have cracked online defenses and gained access to high-value data in just 2 hours during a test of British University's resilience to cyber attacks, which sounds to me like not very. And it seems like they can't get the situation under control, or maybe they just don't want to spend the money. Or maybe people just make mistakes, or they get bribed. Unfortunately, if your information is on somebody's computer somewhere, they can get at it. They can absolutely get at it. So the tests were carried out by so-called ethical hackers from JISC, a government-funded agency that provides universities and colleges with digital support. Within the time frame, they had a 100% track record of penetrating the defenses and accessing personal data. All right, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go to the phones to Keith Rogers. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I just had a slight GPS type thing. I was reading over on foreignpolicy.com. I don't know if this is an admission of a failure or what, but they were talking about whenever Vladimir Putin gets near a naval port, that he scrambles, or they scramble somewhere or somehow, the GPS to where he can't actually be found. And I was wondering, are they tracking him that much?
I would imagine so, but scrambling the GPS wouldn't work so much as scrambling the radar.
Well, yeah, but it's like, to me, it's like, well, you know, to me, I would say, well, that's so that he couldn't be pinpointed in case there was an attack. It reminded me of the Donald Cook, you know.
I understand what you're saying here, but on the aircraft, you know, the GPS information is for the pilot's use and for the flight director's use. And I don't know that it's transmitted outside the aircraft. It may be. I wouldn't really see. Well, yeah, I can see what the point on that might be. But yeah, they might just turn it off so that he can't be tracked.
Yeah, just, they said that whenever he gets near a naval port, and I just thought, well, you know, that's kind of interesting that they'd say that. To me, it's like, well, they're actively tracking where he's at all the time, you know.
Well, they're going to be able to see him on the radar, even with just a skin paint. I don't know. And why just naval ports? And by the way, I'm sure that probably other heads of state have similar systems to obscure their location when they're whizzing across the world.
Right. Yeah. I just thought it was an interesting story there, you know. All right. Well, that's all I wanted to say for you. Okay, there.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. Yeah. Okay, so here we are. Now, we're talking about computers and security. Apparently, major browsers are now going to prevent disabling of click tracking. Newer versions of Chrome, Safari, and Opera will no longer allow you to disable hyperlink auditing, which is a concern for those seeking maximum privacy. Some of these browsers previously allowed you to disable this feature. The newer versions, you are not given the choice. You will allow the tracking. Seek Heil, seek Heil, seek Heil, seek Heil. So far, only Brave and Firefox currently disable hyperlink auditing by default, and don't seem to have any plans on enabling it in the future. One of the nastiest bits of ransomware out there is called Planetary, and it's called that because it commonly uses the name of planets for the extensions added to the encrypted files' names. But apparently over at MCSoft, they have released a decryptor for the Planetary ransomware family that allows you to decrypt your files for free. And that's good work for them, and I'm glad to see it happening. But again, considering how much damage is being done to the economy by ransomware, the risk of life in the case of hospitals who are hit by ransomware, it seems like the attitude come from the U.S. government is a big, who cares? Now remember, Kaspersky Lab came on out and said that the Equation Group Hacker Collective seemed to track back to the NSA. So maybe all this malware and ransomware and everything, it's a project of the United States government. It's another way to plunder wealth from the American people, because they're broke and they're deeply, deeply in debt. Over at Google, they set up what was called an Artificial Intelligence Ethics Board, which is how do we get artificial intelligence systems to behave ethically. And apparently after just 1 week, they've shut it down because base logic and problem solving apparently see ethics as a hindrance. And that is a dangerous warning sign about just where we should allow AI to be getting into. All right. Over in Great Britain, there's this professor, Chris Exley of Keele University, and apparently he infuriated health experts by telling parents that the aluminum in vaccines, and yes, there is aluminum in vaccines, given to babies to protect them from diseases such as whooping cough, and even in the human papillomavirus virus given to teenagers, may cause severe and disabling autism. It provoked outrage. Outrage, do you hear? We're outraged. And his research fundings have now been cut. Now, that is not science. Science is you look at all sides of an argument and then you come to a conclusion. There's the thesis, there's the antithesis, and out of that comes the synthesis, the new knowledge. But apparently the thesis is vaccines are good for you, and anybody who wants to look at the antithesis, no, shut them down. Shut them down. A little bit of good news, though, on the vaccine situation. Remember up in Rockland County where unvaccinated children had been banned from public places, including schools and daycare centers. And it turned out to be an overreaction because while Rockland was saying that there were hundreds of suspected measles cases, it turned out there were only really 2. And 2 lawsuits were filed by parents of unvaccinated children, and the judge rules in their favor and says the ban can't be enforced. And again, if your children are vaccinated and the vaccines actually work, then why do you care if there's an unvaccinated child there? There's another article that we had up on whatreallyhappened.com that's just going down the long list of these eruptions of major diseases in populations that have been vaccinated. Measles, whooping cough, things like that. Another article, this one basically saying that the more you mix vaccines together, the greater the risk of damage. I remember in the movie Vax, they were talking about the triple MMR vaccine and how the damage seemed to be much less if you took the vaccine separately. One for measles, wait a bit, one for mumps, wait a bit, one for rubella. And how the pharmaceutical companies just stopped manufacturing the single-dose vaccines. So parents had no choice. You have to have the MMR. The government says you have to have the MMR. It's just a racket here. Over in India, in the city of Churu, Rajasthan, which is in northern India, there was this amazing giant sandstorm that just came looming in. It looked biblical. They got it on video. It's out there. And unfortunately, a lot of sand in it, sweeping away crops. And that's going to be a problem because we're looking at food shortages all over the planet right now. Over here in the United States, we're still recovering from those floods. Some of them are still ongoing over in the Midwest. Hundreds of millions of dollars in crops destroyed by flooding, and farmers are being told there's nothing the U.S. government can do to help. You're on your own. Now, over and above the crop damage, there are billions of dollars in damage to farm equipment, infrastructure, roads, levees that failed. And if they hadn't really suffered enough, there's a new winter storm coming on in. Let's see, this is the 8th of April. This is Winter Storm Wesley. It is going to bring blizzard conditions to the plains and the upper Midwest starting on Wednesday, including potential blizzard conditions. Gosh darn, that human-caused global warming. All right. Looking back over the last winter here, the October through March U.S. afternoon temperatures were the third coldest on record. And about 3/4 of the U.S. has been below normal temperatures for the past 6 months. Almost the entire U.S. has been above normal precipitation for the past 6 months. And it's all coming together. Mother Nature can definitely be unhappy. Up in the Arctic, the volume of Arctic sea ice is very close to the median over the past 12 years and continues to grow. Okay. Oh, I mentioned this one before. The International Back Station is teeming with bacteria and fungi that can cause diseases and could even corrode the spacecraft. Apparently, the bacteria form biofilms that can promote antibiotic resistance and even stop spacecraft parts from working correctly. Well, that's definitely going to be a factor the next time you design one of these. I forget exactly when they're planning on decommissioning the ISS. I mean, it's a shame to do, but, you know, they don't last forever up there. I mean, the entire outside is just covered with all these micrometeorite craters. In fact, there was a scary incident where some astronauts who were doing an EVA were going back into the airlock, and they looked down at their gloves, and the protective outer glove, not the pressure glove, the protective outer glove was just shredded. And what they realized had happened is as they were using the handrails to pull end over end, those handrails were just pockmarked with all these micrometeorite craters that had very, very sharp edges. Now, you're probably going to see a lot of stories about this. I think we may be looking at a little bit of hype, but I do think it does need to be reported on. There is a fungal infection. It is drug resistant. It's called Candida auris. It has a 50% lethality rate. And it's causing severe illnesses in hospitalized patients around the world. And even worse, a lot of people are concerned that the spores from this fungal infection are actually being caught up in the hospital's ventilation system and basically blown outside. So with the overuse of antibiotics, the evolutionary rise of superbugs has begun. This appears to be one. Candida auris does not respond to antifungal drugs, making it difficult to treat. In some patients, the infection is so deep that the yeast causing it can enter the bloodstream and spread throughout the body. Now, I think I mentioned this a little bit before. Discovery Channel had this live broadcast of Josh Gates from Expedition Unknown with Dr. Zahi Hawass, who's the expert on Egyptology, and they were excavating a newly discovered tomb, and they went down in there with the cameras and actually showed the opening of the sarcophagus on TV. And I noticed that they were all putting on these face masks when they opened the lid of the sarcophagus. Personally, I think Zahi Hawass and Josh Gates took theirs off too soon. The reason for that is very simple. Did you know that the spore for anthrax can survive inside a sarcophagus for 3,000 years? And there's a lot of people who suspect that many of the strange deaths that followed the opening of the tomb of Tutankhamun, the curse of the mummy, were actually infections from inhalation of spores for which their bodies were not prepared to deal with. And of course, back in that day and age, there were no antibiotics. So they were being careful. I think they should have been more careful. But it is a great show, and I imagine Discovery, having put that much money into it, will rerun it, and I would recommend it. I would definitely recommend it. All right, and a little bit of a sad story here, and normally I don't do entertainment news, but this involves an actor known as Dennis Day, who was one of the original Mouseketeers back in the mid-1950s. And he would have turned 76 Sunday, or actually yesterday. He went missing in July of 2018. And they searched his home. They couldn't find anything. They found his car 200 miles away in the possession of two people that nobody seemed to know who they were or how they got the car. That was the bizarre part. Well, apparently they found a body inside Dennis Day's home. Why it took them this long to do it, they're not really saying anything. There's a lot that's not being reported about this. They still have not officially confirmed it's him, but pretty much as everybody's saying, yeah, it's got to be him. And like I said, normally I don't do entertainment news, but I knew and worked with Dennis in the 1970s at the Renaissance Pleasure Fair and various amusement park gigs in Southern California. And he was a great guy. Although he was very frustrated, he could not shed his Mouseketeer image. He was concerned that would follow him for the rest of his life, as apparently it did, because in all the stories talking about him, there's always that picture of him in his little mouse ears. And that story about the car bothers me. Like, why weren't those two people arrested for car theft? All right? But, yeah, that's a little sad. And you get to be my age, you start looking back at all the people you've known who are no longer with us. You start looking at your watch saying, how much more time do I have? Okay, so apparently they're now saying that the polls in Israel are now neck and neck. That Gantz does not have a significant lead over Netanyahu, which I think Layla had it right. Netanyahu knows how to play the game, and he's probably going to win his re-election. Okay. Where to talk to? Excuse me. Apparently Chris Matthews is having a little bit of a panic, and he's issued a dire warning that unless the Democrats stop attacking Trump and start talking about the issues, that they could actually hand Trump a landslide victory in 2020. Well, it won't mean anything unless there's a landslide victory in the House of Representatives, and Nancy Pelosi is already saying there is no way we will lose control of the House of Representatives, not while there is still one illegal immigrant at large inside this great country. So it's getting kind of interesting over there. All right, we're coming up here on a commercial break. We're going to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha America, welcome back to our show here. We're going to break our normal one call per day per caller, and we're going to go back to Dustin in New Jersey. Dustin, I understand you have a question.
Mike, I got a question. I don't know how much time I got left, but I actually got two questions. Mike, on the Sultan of Brunei, it's the Belt in the Road. You got insulted by the British, and that's all you need to know. Don't ever insult the King of Brunei or the Sultan of Brunei, and got to move on against the West there. And then, Mike, on Israel, you had that caller, Jim, said about miracles. Mike, I think it's a miracle Assad is still there, thanks to the Iranians, the Russians, and Hezbollah, and the Syrian army. That's the miracle. You know?
Well, you know...
Hey, Mike, do you find... You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, Jim was out there trying to basically justify Israel, you know, in biblical terms. And as I said before, I don't think foreign policy should be conducted based on the writings of Bronze Age goat herders.
Mike, was it a miracle that they found Israeli mortars in the armaments of ISIS, or Stinger and TOW missiles from the U.S.? Is that a miracle?
No, it's not a miracle.
I mean?
It's just, you know, it's just the way these things get done. It's just more proof that ISIS and Al Qaeda were working as proxies for the United States against Syria. And while I don't like to use the word miracle, it is amazing, and I might add gratifying, that Assad is in fact still in power. But I'm very concerned about that story of 10,000 U.S. combat troops just across the border in Iraq.
And before I let you go, Mike, what about where Israel and the United States flies over Syrian army, or they fly over ISIS to bomb the Syrian army? Is that a miracle? Come on, people. You know, I mean, we all know what's going on. You know, we live in a real world, okay? Not fantasy land, you know? You got good people and bad people on the planet. And it seems like the bad people... We know who the bad people are doing these things. You know, has nothing to do with miracles or not. You know, Mike? And we're arming very bad people. And we're the ones arming them. And that's all I got to say, Mike. Have a good finish to the show there.
All right. Thanks an awful lot here. And yeah, absolutely. Bad people are doing bad things. We know the real agenda for all these wars. And the propagandists are trying to convince you that there's some other more noble purpose for all the bloodshed, whether it's, you know, bringing democracy to this country, or saving that country from an evil, cruel tyrant, or because somewhere in some religious text it says that we will not be allowed to go to heaven unless we do whatever. Did you know the origin of Palm Sunday? Probably a lot of you don't. Well, in Europe, there weren't any palm trees. But when you went off to fight in the Crusades, one of the things that you could do is bring back a palm branch. And if you took care of it and dried it out, it would last a very long time. And on Palm Sunday, you would bring it with you to church to basically sort of show everybody you had been to the Holy Land and you had fought in the Crusades, slaughtering the Saracens. And again, the people who do the fighting are never told the real reason for the fight. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and do the Jim Goddard Show. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. Please keep talking peace and the folly of war to everybody around you. We've got to become a voice for peace in this land. We really do. We can't just sit back and let this disaster happen. Please donate to Republic Broadcasting. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.